Looking for on July 30th, the Jerome Powell meeting with the FOMC. That's going to begin in 45 minutes. What I'm going to do here as we wait for them to get started is I'm going to walk us through exactly what they're meeting on, what this Fed rate decision actually means, what it could impact for you down the road, some of the breakdowns of the terms, U3, U6, JOLTS, unemployment, CPI, what does it all mean? And then we're going to sit together, like I said, in about 45 minutes, 50 minutes if they're a little late, to see what they're going to do in July with rates. So as we let people jump on in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my browser. I'm going to walk us through a few things that they're going to be meeting on. 1 second. Let me spill a little water on myself real quick. It's part of my ritual for getting started. There we go. Oof. All right. So, live television. I want to break down for us a few of the items that they're going to be going through today in the U6 department, the U3 department, and the CPI index. Now, the U3 is specifically what they're going to focus on when they talk about unemployment rate, and U6 is going to focus on both the unemployment rate in total, the U3 in total, and it's also going to add in people that are trying to be employed, or people that are part-time, not by choice. They're part-time by force. I'm also going to go into real quick, I need to make sure on YouTube that we're live at this very moment. I'm not 100% certain. I'm not 100% certain. I'm not right here. Let's look at this all together. I might cut this off the front end. Let's all go look together. Return to studio. Are we live? Are we in there right now? Content, live. Oh, it looks like we are. It looks like we are live. Yes, we are indeed live. Okay. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Live television. I have no clue what I'm doing. This is one of my first times going live on. Oh, it's because I don't have the chat panel up, guys. I don't have the chat panel up. Chat box, chat. Where is it? There it is. YouTube chat. Now I can see it. We're good. Now I see you. Katie, Danny, everybody letting me know. Oh my gosh, you guys have been chatting for a while. Oh my goodness. Well, one of the first comments came from Zachary. Hey, you should just go live and start chatting about stuff. That's what we're going to do. Just to be clear, here's where we're going to start things. If you're listening to this, hoping to listen to Jerome Powell live and get a reaction, what that is going to be is in about 30 to 35 minutes. What I'm going to do ahead of time, though, while we're waiting on the Federal Reserve to come on screen, waiting for Jerome Powell, we're going to talk about what the CPI index actually is and what more than likely is going to happen on our next report that comes out. What they're talking about when they talk about unemployment, where they're getting the numbers, U3, U6, JOLTS. And I want to break down where this inflation actually is. Because we're going to hear blanket numbers here in about 30 minutes. We're going to hear blanket CPI numbers, and we're going to hear blanket U3 numbers. Let's talk about, Danny, you've been here for a minute. I'm here, brother. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I feel bad. I've been here since 7 a.m. You guys are the best. Mock, what's going on? If you're here, chat. If you're here, chat along. If you just want to listen in, you're welcome to. Appreciate you being here. So the two items that the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell are going to be getting into are the CPI index, which is the Consumer Price Index. Consumer Price Index is a measure of the average change over time in prices paid by urban consumers, it's me and you, for a basket of consumer goods and services. What's a basket of consumer goods and services? Breaking down real quickly, real simply, they take about 40,000 different products that are core to our life and services that are core to our life. Like a service would be electric service. They count shelter as a service. That's kind of odd. Goods, food, clothing, that's what they're counting as goods and services. And they take them all and they say, are they more or less expensive than they were last year? And that's when you get this 2.7, 2.9, 2.4, 3.8, whatever that number is. That's simply put the percentage of inflation, how much more or less expensive those items are than this time last year. So the CPI index currently is at 2.7 for June. This is up 2.4% since, what did I just do? That's the same thing. Why'd I click on it if it's going to give me the same numbers? It's the same exact Here's what I was looking for. It's plus 3 from April, which is 2.4. 2.7 is where we're sitting at today. But what I want to break down is when we see that 2.7, you'll see right here, all items 2.7. And guys, I can't have my eyes on the chat right now, so I apologize. I'll be right to it. All items at 2.7%, but what is it counting? So it's counting food, it's counting energy, and these are all the items without food and energy. So let's look at all items without food and energy. That's 2.9% since last year. When we click that, we see two different categories: commodities, less food and energy commodities, and services, less energy services. So basically, this is counting all services except energy services, and this is counting all commodities except food and energy. So if we go into commodities for food and energy, we'll see how it breaks down. We have apparel, we have new vehicles, we have used vehicles, medical care, alcohol, tobacco products. Geez, if you're smoking tobacco, 6.3% more expensive of a habit than it was last year. So sorry, my tobacco lovers. If we go into services, again, housing, as you'll see here in a moment, counted as shelter, is where we'll find in the CPI index how much more expensive or less expensive housing is measured as a service. If we click on it, we'll see that shelter is leading the way. 3.8% more expensive than it was last year. And if we click on that, we'll see even further that 3.8% increase is mainly in rent, matching it exactly. Rent of a primary residence up 3.8% since last year, but 4.2% in owner equivalent rent, which is what they label as resale cost. Now, let me tell you right now how they get owner equivalent rent. Anybody in the chat, by the way, real quick, does anybody know how we get owner equivalent rent? How they actually measure that? If you don't be afraid, because they don't teach it in high school. They don't teach it in college unless you're going after economics. The owner equivalent rent is made by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, BLS. You'll hear them commonly broken down abbreviation-wise. BLS makes 40,000 phone calls to different households and gets them on the phone and says, "Hi, do you own a home? Yes or no?" Let's assume they said yes. Yes, I do. And then, no, it's not the MLS, Danny. It's not Zillow. It's not any of those. You would think to measure how much more expensive or less expensive is a house, you would just go straight to Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, MLS, some type of data source, right? No, what they do is they call and they say, "You own your home? Okay, great. How much do you think you could rent it for?" Well, I'm thinking like $2,300 a month would be fair. I've never once thought about putting my home on the market or inquired with a professional about what it could actually rent for, or tested out the rental market or seen anybody renting in my area to really know the answer to that question. But $2,350. And no, Danny, they're not. If you said, "Danny, I own 12 rentals," all they're going to ask you about is your primary. It's called owner equivalent rent. What is the equivalent rental amount for the property you occupy? They don't care that they do not care about the real data. If they wanted rent data, they could actually just go onto websites, get the data from the source. But the CPI index is based off of surveys. I'm not against surveys either. I understand statistics. I understand that we only need this much of a total variable to understand the likelihood of where it's going to move or where it's currently sitting. Jerome gets on here in about, let's see, what time is it? We have 34 minutes until Mr. Jerome speaks. I'll bring this back up so that when I start yapping and people join in, they understand why we're yapping. We're yapping to wait for Jerome. All hail Jerome. So they're getting owner equivalent rent, which is 33% weighted in that CPI index, by the way. 33% weighted, meaning a third of the entire CPI is based upon shelter. And they get shelter based off of calling people and saying, "What do you think you could rent your home for?" Not Zillow data, not the MLS, not an actual data source. I don't know. I just think it's weird. I think it's odd. So taking that into consideration, we can kind of take with a grain of salt where we're getting these numbers for rent of primary residence and owner equivalent rent of residences, which combined give us shelter up 3.8%. And we can see the total CPI index is 2.7%. So is outpacing The actual CPI index is housing. So what's bringing it down? We can see energy's bringing it down. All items up total 2.7%, but food and all items less food are above that. And we already saw shelter is at 3.7%. So what's involved in energy and how's it being brought down? So if we click into energy, which again is the only negative category of the main three on this is from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics website. This is the CPI index incarnate right in front of us. 2.7% overall, but the only one that was down was energy. But if we click on energy, we'll see what exactly was down because we have a graph here that is on completely two different sides of the scale. Energy commodities from last year down 7.9%, but energy services are up 7.5%. Commodities include fuel oil and gasoline of all types. So fuel oil down 4.7 and gasoline down 8.3. As we know, fuel oil, very, very beneficial when it comes to the agriculture and industrial industry. So many industries that rely on oil, not only for transport, for the running of their machines. So this is a great look for anybody on the commercial side. Gasoline, great look for anyone buying a car, riding a car, in an Uber, using Uber, running their own Uber fleet. Gasoline's great going down. But we also know that this is something determined by the crude oil market and something that our American market right now doesn't have as much pull on up or down. This is an international market. So going down is great, but we can see it's the only thing that went down. And if we break it down even further, we can see that only really one side of it went down. The other side of it was skyrocketed up. What's involved in energy services is exactly what you and I are going to guaranteed use. Natural gas for heat or electricity for your house. Electric services are up 5.8% since last year. Natural gas heat, God rest your soul, 14.2% higher than this time last year. So that's how the CPI breaks down. CPI is only one of the measures that they're going to talk about today, though. They're going to talk about unemployment as well. Let me bring up this YouTube chat. They keep raising prices here. On what? On what? Is someone talking? Oh, I didn't know the Federal Reserve had a promo. Let's let this thing rock.
The Federal Reserve Board of Governors, 12 Federal Reserve banks operating around our nation, and the Federal Open Market Committee. Based in Washington, D.C., the Board of Governors is the governing body of the Federal Reserve System. It's an agency of the federal government that reports to and is directly accountable to Congress.
Talk about Jekyll Island.
Of 7 members, or governors, who are nominated by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. Governors are appointed for 14-year terms. The Board of Governors oversees and sets policy direction for the system, including 12 Federal Reserve banks located around the country, which take the pulse of the nation's economic health from a regional perspective. The 12 reserve banks represent different geographic regions, or districts, and were set up based on regional economic considerations. Although supervised by the Federal Reserve Board, the reserve banks operate independently in many respects. The reserve banks carry out a number of core system functions, such as supervising and examining commercial banks and other financial institutions, enforcing compliance with federal consumer protection and fair lending laws, while promoting local community development and lending to depository institutions to ensure crucial liquidity in the financial system. They and the board also play a key role in another primary Fed function, fostering the safety and efficiency of our nation's payment systems, including distributing currency and coin to banks, operating electronic payment systems, and clearing our checks. In addition, the reserve banks act as the government's bank, providing services such as maintaining the Treasury Department's transaction account and issuing and redeeming U.S. government securities. They also act as a bank for banks by providing key financial services to banks.
Not the Fed Reserve with the sizzle reel on how they operate.
A wealth of information.
It's actually a pretty well put together video.
Information that is vital to formulating a national monetary policy that helps maintain a healthy U.S. economy and a stable financial system. The board and the reserve banks together.
Delaware is the same. Delaware rose prices as well. And it's not a uncommon occurrence right now to hear that your electric bill went up 10%, 20%, 30% year over year. People have posted their bills from 2018, 2019 to today. And it went up over 100% in some cases. Like 70, 80% seems to be the minimum over the last 4 to 5 years. Can that keep happening? Are we going to keep doing this? I see Illinois, Washington, Delaware. Is everybody's electric bill just going up? Is that the case? Is everybody's electric bill just going up in every direction? Because at the same time, with rent and occupation not keeping up with one another, the cost of living in the home versus what you're making working your job to keep the home, the wages, they're not keeping up. It's crazy that the cost of supplying and keeping your home alive, keeping from being buried financially, just to keep the lights on, literally, the electric bill, just to keep the lights on. Montana, Shane says out there, prices up. Where are you at, electric bill? Are you up or down in the last year? It was up 80, 90 just in the last month. $90 in the last month. Haley? Haylie. Can't say I've seen Haley spelled that way before. Might be the first time I've ever seen that one. SC Energy has gone up. South Carolina Energy up. We got Washington in the chat. We've had Illinois in the chat. South Carolina, Montana, Delaware. We're going to get a poll started in the chat. Will he get asked about resigning? Guys, we're here for the Q&A, just as an FYI. We're here for the Q&A. If you're unaware, we've known for quite a while they're not going to cut rates. We talked about this in our last show. We talked about this 3 shows ago. We talked about this the last time that we live streamed while he was talking, that we're probably not going to see a cut this summer. Why? Oregon's going up too, and Philly's going up. Jeez, I was just in Philly yesterday. Why aren't they going up? Because historically speaking, anytime this number right here, which is inflation, CPI, annual inflation, anytime this number is above 2% and U3 is below 5%. Here, let me zoom this in a little bit. I want to make sure that we can all see this. Is this coming through on the screen? See, I cut off too much. I knew it. Give me some seconds for some live television. Let's cut off more. There we go. Now we see the whole graph. Check this out real quick. What's up, Utah? Where are you at in the chat, by the way? Quick location check. Just tag in where you're from. Just state. If you're not from the United States, where in the U.S. are you from? Or I'm sorry, if you're not in the United States, what country are you from? Not a big live streamer. This is something I'm getting better at, so forgive me. Let's look at the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate we see has stayed remarkably stable, coming down out of COVID, and now we sit at 4.1. We think this might go up to 4.2. We get this report this week, actually. And again, we may ask ourselves, when have they cut rates before when unemployment was at a specific number? Well, the answer is 5. 5% unemployment historically seems to be the barometer for when we start significantly cutting rates. We, at the very least, need CPI to come below 2% before we even think about it. One, if not both of these metrics, have to be met in order for us to cut rates. Historically speaking, we have either been below 5%. What's up, Kentucky? What's up, Utah, Washington, Michigan, and Mississippi? Northern Illinois, Georgia, what's going on? What's going on? I'm from Delaware, Alabama, California. Historically speaking, we can only speak to what we know, and graphs and numbers never lie. Beautiful numbers. We know without a doubt, historically speaking, we have never cut rates when CPI annually is above 2% and unemployment is below 5%, unemployment being U3. But you may say to yourself, Zach, I feel like the job market's worse than what U3 says. And that's where we get things like U6, where we can look into those numbers, total job openings, layoffs. Here's an article I pulled up just recently. U.S. jobs market, job openings in the market, fell 7.4 million last month as the job market continues to cool. Employers posted 7.4 million job vacancies last month, a sign that the American job market continues to cool. Now, I always take articles with a grain of salt and think to myself, who are they writing for? ABC is typically writing more on the left side, so take it with the grain of salt that they're probably going to write it up in an attacking way at either the Federal Reserve, but in this case, the current president. The Labor Department reported Tuesday that job openings in June were down from 7.7 million in May. Layoffs were little changed, but the number of people quitting their jobs is a sign of confidence in their prospects elsewhere dropped last month. The U.S. job market has lost momentum this year, partly because of the lingering effects of 11 interest rate hikes by the inflation fighters of the Federal Reserve in 2022 and 2023. I don't think that has a lot to do with it at all. Interest rate hikes. Why did I think that said cuts? Yeah, that's actually absolutely a part of it. My bad. I thought it said cuts. I'm like, first of all, we haven't cut. So I thought I was reading the most BS I've ever, my brain seized. And partly because President Donald J. Trump's trade wars have created uncertainty that is paralyzing managers making hiring decisions. I would go a level above managers making hiring decisions and more the owners of the companies themselves making hiring decisions. Let me bring up another graph real quick that I think hits a little harder. Seasonal work. If we pull up seasonal work, this is where we get to see a lot of no, this isn't it. Where are we? Price by season, unemployed. No. Population. Let's go into, I have a housing market tracker, and I know it's in there. I know it's linked in that document. I'm about to show you my housing affordability tracker, the Trump tracker. We're tracking bills. We're tracking housing metrics. But we're also tracking down here, temporary work. There we go. This is where we can see owners making decisions around jobs very easily. When money was good coming out of COVID, we saw a lot of employers creating temporary work, seasonal work jobs, part-time positions. Why? Payroll is one of the biggest expenses any P&L sheet, profit and loss sheet, a business is going to have. And having more money flowing, more liquid capital allows for more payroll. And if you can have more payroll, a lot of times in a lot of well-run companies, it means you can scale, it means you can serve more people. Now, since then, since the peak of March 2022, we've seen this number slowly decline in temporary help services being offered by employers, now down to 2.5 million, peaking at 3.1 million. Now, this is a number that typically does go down in accordance with recessions. You'll see this gray bar, that's a recession. If I make this graph go all the way back to 1990, you'll see each time we had a recession, we also saw jobs quickly getting rid of the option to work part-time or seasonally for them. Now, that's a number that we can see here with the job openings total non-farm. Let me make sure you can see this full graph. You sure can. Oh, look at that beautiful graph. If we look at that, we can see in the last, how many years we got here? We got all the way back to 2000. That anytime a recession hits, we typically see job openings go down in total as well. Not just full-time, or not just part-time, but total job openings. Anybody not working on a farm at the very least. That number consistently has gone down during recessions. We can see this is 2006 in through 2008. But as we look at 2021 to today, that number's dropped pretty drastically from a peak of, again, in March of 2022 at 12,134,000 job openings to now we have gone down from 7.7 to 7.4. But again, that article slightly leaning, because if we go back to April of last year, this number has jumped up, down, pretty just marginally, minusculely. January went from 7.7 down to 7.4 in February, and then it fell once again into March, but then it picked right back up into spring, and now we see another decline. So it'll be interesting to see what July does. Does it take another tick down? Does it go back up? But here's the unemployment rate that Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve will be focusing on, and that is the U3 unemployment rate. Currently in June, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, is at 4.1. This is down actually from May at 4.2, further signaling a strong job market and one that Jerome Powell will probably talk about. We know that he loves to talk about his two mandates and how he believes they're doing fantastically. So 4.1 down from the prior month will be something that's brought up as a reason for not cutting rates. And we already talked about this, but the CPI index. CPI rose from 2.7% Let me read this. Yeah, the consumer price index for all urban consumers, that's retail consumers, you and I, rose 2.7% for the last 12 months, ending June 2025. That's year over year, after rising 2.4% over the 12 months ending in May. Meaning in May, last month, if you went back 12 months before that, prices had gone up 2.4%. Now, when we look at June versus last June, they're up 2.7%. Just to be very clear, cumulative inflation year over year combined with the other past years, it just keeps stacking and stacking and stacking and stacking. But we already went through this. CPI index was largely anchored down by energy, and a lot of that was gasoline and fuel oil, all while electric services, heating into your house, natural gas up 8.5 and 14.2% respectively. And if we backtrack into all items without food and energy and look into services, we'll find that shelter's in there and it's up 4.2% year over year, the way that they measure it in owner equivalent rent. We also know that NAR just dropped an article and Redfin corroborated the data to say that the median sales price in America has hit a new all-time high above $435,000. And housing, unfortunately, isn't going to be a topic that Mr. Powell's more than likely going to riff about. I wish they talked more about it. I wish we talked more about rent and we talked more about housing and we talked more about shelter. I wish instead of just having a CPI index, we also talked about an HIA, a housing affordability index. Let's combine all the utilities needed to get into a home and healthcare and home insurance and property taxes. And let's measure it up against median income of a household. We could track wages directly against the normal everyday home. And we can just combine or compare the two, create an index out of it. National Association of Realtors already has one very similar to that, where they take the median income of a region and the normal median home of that region, and they go, whoop, can these two meet? Do they work? Let me show it to you real quick. Let me go back into the housing affordability tracker. This is where I store all my links. So I got all my links. If I go to affordability by region, this is going to pull up. Is this the most updated one? It's not. Let me go into just NAR. NAR affordability index should be purple because I'll be clicking on it. And if we go into quarterly, we'll see the first time home buyer affordability report. This comes out every quarter. And if we look at January through March right here, this is quarter one of 2025. If you can't read this, quarters up here. This is quarter one, 2025. The starter home price in America is $342,000. They assume a 10% down payment, meaning a loan amount would be $307,000, and today's interest is 6.9. Follow me here. Here's where it gets funky. So they have this buyer index over here, and it's currently at a 67.9. Why? Because they take the qualifying income to buy that very first time home. This one over here, the $342,000 home, they say, what's the income needed to finance that at $307,000? So they're assuming, again, a 10% down payment. So they're assuming you have this in the bank ready to go. Over here, they say, knowing that, how much would that person have to make per year to buy that home? And the number's $99,792. What do you think the median first-time income is? It's $67,783. So when you divide the two together, you get an index of 67.9. I will tell you, this number has been as high as in the 80s, 90s, and even peaking over 100 in 2020. That was the end of 2020. But that index alone could be sourced, talked about, referenced. I know occasionally we'll get a reporter that asks about housing, but I want someone in that media room to really drill in. Why do we seem to not care about this? Why in this bifurcated economy do we seem to only be focusing on the top end of the K? We seem to only be worried about those that are wealthy and own already, corporate borrowing, billionaire borrowing, banks, health. We aren't actually taking into consideration the 80% of the nation. We're taking average numbers, which culminate everybody into this one big pot, and the billionaires and corporations really weight that up. We're not talking about the normal median American not having a job opportunity after getting a degree right now. That job market is obnoxiously bad. It's, I think, record highs, at least for the last 4 decades, the unemployment rate amongst those getting out of college with a bachelor's degree, a daggone bachelor's degree. But you don't see that number in these reports. This is the U6, by the way. The U3 is what you're going to hear about today. U3, just to be very clear, is what they're going to talk about today. And U3 factors in currently seeking job individuals that are able to work, want to work, and want to work full time, but aren't finding a job. Now, 2 things to be very clear about this report. When we see these numbers right here, and we see we went down from 4.2 to 4.1, if I bring this to just the last year, we'll see that this has moved ever so slightly, 4.2, 4.2, 4.1, 4, 4.1. We've been sitting in this range for quite a while. I'll bring it back out to the last 5 years. You'll see the slide coming down off COVID. But this number, just to be very honest with you, is not my favorite way of us tracking this. If you were to get a phone call, which, by the way, if you were curious how they get the unemployment rate, you're going to be disappointed, because the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, instead of contacting unemployment offices, instead of getting like ADP payroll data, instead of being in contact with states and local offices around employment, or having businesses, when they lay people off or create jobs, have to like update a roster, update a database of, we have X amount of jobs potentially, we're filled at X capacity, we're looking for jobs for these 3 things. And that just once a month, just submit it. Maybe once a quarter, easy, just that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. To get the accurate data, because when you get the U3, you know what they're not including? They don't include super unemployed people or the gig economy. What are those 2 things? The gig economy is exactly what people go to when they can't find a job. Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub, Instacart, Etsy, OnlyFans, all these places where people are like, I got to make a dime or I'm going to die, are going to the gig economy. And if you work in the gig economy but don't have a job, you are not considered unemployed according to the U3. You make a few $100 a week driving somebody around, you are considered employed. The other side of that, if you're super unemployed, you don't count, because if you've been looking for a full-time job willingly in this market for more than 4 weeks, guess what? You don't count anymore. You're super unemployed. You're no longer counted on the U3 market. So total unemployed combined with all people marginally attached to the labor force plus total employment part-time for economic reasons is a better way of looking at the market, but still not perfect, because the gig economy still hurts this side. But these people right now, as you're seeing on this report, it's a little bit more dramatic. We have a 7.8% down to 7.7% in June U6 report. That's nearly double the U3 report. Nearly double the U3 report, including more people that are just beaten down by this economy and unable to get full-time work, even though they want full-time work. How much time we got 9 minutes. The 9-minute countdown has begun. Jerome will be on in a moment, and we will shut up and listen. And we're here for those good questions, because these are the type of questions I would personally like to see brought up. Why don't we start measuring more in the U6 job openings, JOLTS report? Why aren't we actively looking into indexes like this, the Housing Affordability Index for first-time buyers? And why do we consistently always worry about the top side of the economy? Let me go through some comments. What's going on, y'all? Appreciate everybody that's listening to my whack self talk about this. I'm just an 8.5-year real estate agent that slowly had a unknowing front row VIP seat to watching the American dream get sifted out from the regular everyday American. And I want to build a platform big enough to create a systemic change that perpetuates a change in the wealth gap discussion. Right now, we talk about it like something that is just a goal you have to get to. You have to get to the point where you can be on the right side of the economy, grow with the good people, grow with the billionaires. But there's going to be a growing number, a higher ratio of people, a growing number by the year ratio of people that make less because the top want more. Greed cannot be tamed. Lust for power, never going to have enough of it. And it's going to continue through lobbying. It's going to continue through super PACs. And it's going to continue through the crooked and bought-off lawmakers that perpetuate the laws that make sure that things like Citizens United go through and private equity can invest in margin and big mergers can happen under whatever scope of the antitrust law that we're measuring it by. We don't even hardly utilize our antitrust laws anymore because it's so easy to corporately veil an LLC and trust yourself into something else altogether. We need some change. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. That's what we're doing on this channel. Federal Reserve has a lot to do with that. They have huge control and influence over the market and rates. What we'll see today, more than likely, is not a lot of movement, just to be very clear, as we have the last 5-6 minutes together. Throw in a couple comments. Love the Trump and Epstein background. Trump should have public Q&A with average Joes. I like that, Danny, or at least people that are other Joes. Like, why do only reporters get to ask questions? Let's get some economists in there. Let's get Ray Dalio in there. Let's get Thomas Sowell in there, his old ass. Genuinely, can you go over one of these meetings? Genuinely, can you go to one of these meetings and ask yourself? I don't think I can. It's a vetted invite-only room, to my understanding, just like the White House presser. Which back in January, when they said that they were going to allow people in that were creators, I did submit, but if you've ever seen my TikTok profile, I think their vetting process would have a pretty easy time denying me. I mean, it's not there. I don't hide it behind too much of a veil of what I think about the man. I have a daughter. What can I say? It's really tough for me to see any leader of any company. Let me be real. When I go to, and maybe you do this too, when I go to a new restaurant or a new bar and grill, do you ever see the owner? Right, it's real common to see the owner when they open up a new business. You know, first couple of weeks, you see them out and about. They're hustling around. They're wiping stuff down. They're talking to everybody that they can. Big smile. You know, that's typically how they operate. But I like to just sit and watch this guy work, sit and watch this gal work, couple work, because I think you can tell a lot about a person's motives by how they treat other people. Personally, I think there's no better tell on where someone is going to end than by seeing where they started. Where's the foundation? What's the purpose of this? What are you doing this for? It's kind of easy to get to where they're more than likely going to end up. And when you look down the track record of someone like a Donald Trump, it hurts me personally to anytime judge somebody positively when I see them treat people negatively or without kindness. Just personally. And regardless of economic prowess or business savvy, foreign trade experience, I can't get past the lack of candor in conversation, the lack of being upfront in answers. Even to this day, this isn't new, obviously. It's been going on for decades. But just recently, I watch all of these live, by the way, because I don't like watching clips. I watch them when I have to, but I don't like watching clips. I want to watch it all. I want to see the full answer, the full question. I want to hear the pause in the middle. I want to hear the clutter. I want to hear it all. I don't want anybody else to be able to tell me what they think they heard. I will consult you when I've heard the source. I will get the professional opinions when I've heard the source. And I was listening to one the other day. He's in there with the UK Prime Minister, I believe it was. He just signed the UE deal, European Union deal, EU. I said UE. And he was asked about young girls and whether or not these people that were being apparently stolen out of Mar-a-Lago by Jeffrey Epstein. Apparently there is a bunch of, and he was asked basically straight up, were you hanging out and knowledgeable of these young women? If they were stolen from Mar-a-Lago, they were there. So why were they there? And he gave this long filibustery answer. The answer is, are you hanging out with younger girls? The answer is no. Friend, I was hearing recently that you were hanging out with a 16-year-old girl. Is that true? No. Oh my goodness. Where did you hear that? We got to get to the bottom of this. We can't let that. That's crazy. Personally, I would release every single list and every single file and every single document that exists within the file if it meant it would clear my name and I could get back to business. Enough with this blue, red, look back at Obama, look back at Russia, I understand there's risks and there's other things going on. There's wars that we got to attend to, apparently, and there's countries we got to support. But why can't we deal with home? Why can't we fix home? Why can't we worry about shelter and housing for home, power for home? Why can't we worry about here? I'm not saying we can't worry about that stuff, but can we put being the world security guard on hold for now? Because the place that you're securing is falling apart. The place that you're securing from the inside, from the bottom up, is collapsing because of billionaire greed and lust for power. And I know we're about to listen to the leader of the central bank who leads pretty much the charge in this wealth transfer. So it is kind of ironic that we're doing this. But nevertheless, we are but a part of the system, and the system is working as it should. A normal person would respond in that manner. They want to clear the air immediately. He's not normal. Yeah, I mean, normal is subjective. And my take on how somebody should respond to something is only my take. Obviously, I can't speak for how anybody would react to something or let me pull this baby up. He should be talking anytime soon. I still hear the music in the background. Obviously, everybody's going to respond to something a little bit differently, but I think genuinely when I see somebody of integrity and somebody that wants accountability from everybody else, they hold themselves accountable to a very high level. They're very disciplined physically a lot of times, not all the time. So you can see that there's usually a bit of emotional intelligence. They have a bit more just, I'll shut up because the main man has just arrived. Let me fix this crop too, by the way, ever so slightly. Gonna fix this before he jumps on. The show is about to begin. I got his mic turned up, so when he begins speaking, I shall shut up. Why did the concurrent viewers drop from the 30s now that he's actually talking? This is the best part. Oh, his volume is up. They're just not talking yet. There he is.
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment.
Yes,
inflation has been running somewhat above our 2% longer run objective. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that growth of economic activity has moderated. GDP rose at a 1.2% pace in the first half of this year, down from 2.5% last year. Although the increase in the second quarter was stronger at 3%, focusing on the first half of the year helps smooth through the volatility in the quarterly figures related to the unusual swings in net exports. The moderation in growth largely reflects a slowdown in consumer spending. In contrast, business investment in equipment and intangibles picked up from last year's pace. Activity in the housing sector remains weak. In the labor market, conditions have remained solid. Payroll job gains averaged 150,000 per month over the past 3 months. The unemployment rate at 4.1% remains low and has stayed in a narrow range over the past year. Wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, a wide set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market are broadly in balance and consistent with.
I'm turning up the volume.
Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total PCE prices rose 2.5% over the 12 months ending in June, and that, excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.7%. These readings are little changed from the beginning of the year, although the underlying composition of price changes has shifted. Services inflation has continued to ease, while increased tariffs are pushing up prices in some categories of goods. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs, as reflected in both market-based and survey-based measures. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5% and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Changes to government policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. Higher tariffs have begun to show through more clearly to prices of some goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to prevent a one-time increase in the price level from becoming an ongoing inflation problem. For the time being, we're well positioned to learn more about the likely course of the economy and the evolving balance of risks before adjusting our policy stance. We see our current policy stance as appropriate to guard against inflation risks. We're also attentive to risks on the employment side of our mandate. In coming months, we will receive a good amount of data that will help inform our assessment of the balance of risks and the appropriate setting of the federal funds rate. At this meeting, the committee continued its discussions as part of our 5-year review of our monetary policy framework. We focused on potential revisions to our statement on longer-run goals and monetary policy strategy, and are on track to wrap up any modifications by late summer. The Fed has been assigned 2 goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Chair Powell. There's a lot of lean in the markets, and not to mention out of the administration for a rate cut now in September. Is that expectation unrealistic at this point?
So, as you know, today we decided to leave our policy rate where it's been, where I would characterize as modestly restrictive. Inflation is running a bit above 2%, as I mentioned, even excluding tariff effects. The labor market's solid, historically low unemployment. Financial conditions are accommodative, and the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy were holding it back inappropriately. So it seems to me and to almost the whole committee that the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy is holding it back.
Notice he said almost
inappropriately, and modestly restrictive policy seems appropriate. All that said, there's also downside risk to the labor market. In coming months, we'll receive a good amount of data that will help inform our assessment of the balance of risks and the appropriate setting of the federal funds rate.
So just to follow up, by coming months, does that include the possibility you'll be getting essentially 2 rounds of jobs and inflation data between now and the September meeting? is that potentially adequate to make a decision to lower rates at that point?
So you're right. We do have, this is an intermeeting period when we'll get 2 full rounds of employment and inflation data before the time of the September meeting. We have made no decisions about September. We don't do that in advance. We'll be taking that information into consideration and all the other information we get as we make our decision at the September meeting.
Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You took out the word or the notion that uncertainty has diminished from this statement. Does that mean uncertainty has increased? And I'm just wondering, the administration has struck several deals with large trading partners where it seems like we now know what the rate is going to be. Does knowing that rate add to your certainty to change policy, or do you need to wait to see the economic effects?
So essentially, the statement in our statement about uncertainty reflects what's gone on since the last meeting. So at the time of the last meeting, uncertainty had moved down a little bit, but it was more or less even this time. So we took out, had diminished because it didn't diminish further. So there's not really much in that. And then your second question is, say again?
There have been several deals that have been struck, and now we seem to have an idea of what the tariff rates are going to be with some of our large trading partners. Does that not add to the kind of certainty you might need, or is it you're waiting for the economic effects to show themselves?
No, I think we're still, you're right, it's been a very dynamic time for these trade negotiations, and lots and lots of events in the intermeeting period, but we're still a ways away from seeing where things settle down. We are clearly getting more and more information, and I think at this point, people's estimates, our estimates, outside estimates of the likely, effective level of tariffs is not moving around that much at this point. But at the same time, there are many uncertainties left to resolve. So yes, we are learning more and more. It doesn't feel like we're very close to the end of that process, and that's not for us to judge, but it feels like there's much more to come, as well, looking ahead.
Neil.
We'll break all this down
Hi, Chairman.
afterwards.
Neil Irwin with Axios. This morning we got a GDP report in which final domestic private purchases decelerated, slowest pace since 22. There was a weakness in the interest-sensitive sectors and residential investment, commercial structures. Are those not signs that monetary policy is a little too restrictive right now, given current economic conditions?
So the GDP and PDFP numbers came in pretty much right where we expected them to come in. You got to look at the whole picture. So certainly, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, economic activity data, GDP, private domestic final purchases, which we think is a narrower but better signal for future, for where the economy is going, has come down to a little better than 1%, 1.2%, I think, in the case of GDP for the first half, whereas it was 2.5% last year. So that has certainly come down. But if you look at the labor market, what you see is, by many, many statistics, the labor market is kind of still in balance. It's things like quits, job openings, and let alone the unemployment rate. They're all by many measures, very similar to where they were a year ago. So you do not see weakening in the labor market. You do see a slowing in job creation, but also a slowing in the supply of workers. So you've got a labor market that's in balance, albeit partially because both demand and supply for workers is coming down at the same pace, and that's why the unemployment rate has remained roughly stable, which is why I said we do see downside risk in the labor market. I mean, our two mandate variables, right, are inflation and maximum employment, stable prices and maximum employment, not so much growth. So the labor market looks solid. Inflation is above target, and even if you look through the tariff effects, we think it's still a bit above target, and that's why our stance is where it is. But as I mentioned, downside risks to the labor market are certainly apparent.
So on labor, given the fluid labor supply situation, is there a number for this jobs report we get on Friday that would look to you like equilibrium job growth?
The main number you have to look at now is the unemployment rate, because it's true that the demand for workers in the form of, let's call it, just say payroll jobs, that number has come down, but so has the break-even number, kind of in tandem. So, as long as that puts the labor market in balance, the fact that it's getting into balance due to declines in both supply and demand, though, I think it is suggestive of downside risk. So we of course, will be watching that carefully.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the New York Times. Two of your colleagues called for a quarter-point cut today, and I'm wondering what aspects of their argument were most compelling to you and how you're weighing their views against those on the committee who, as of the June forecast, were in the camp of the Fed holding interest rates steady for the remainder of the year. And just in terms of the June SEP in particular, is that still the best representation of where the core of the committee is?
So on the dissents, what you want from everybody and also from a dissenter is a clear explanation of what your thinking is and what are the arguments you're making, and we had that today. So I think basically this was quite a good meeting all around the table where people were thought carefully about this and put their positions out there. As I mentioned, the sort of the majority of the committee was of the view that inflation's a bit above target, maximum employment is at target. That calls for modestly restrictive, in my way of thinking, modestly restrictive stance of policy for now. But we had two dissenters who I think, you want that clear thinking and expression of your thinking, and we certainly had that today, I think all around the table. In terms of, you asked about the June SEP, I wouldn't, that you're right, that's what it says, and that may well, I couldn't point to it 6 weeks later as expressing people's thought. You really can't do that. We don't run an SEP, and I don't like to substitute in my own estimate of what the SEP might be. We don't have one. So I'll just say that, we haven't made any decisions about September. We'll be monitoring all the incoming data and asking ourselves whether the federal funds rate is in the right place.
And just on the point about policy being only modestly restrictive, does that mean that there's actually not much scope to reduce rates once the conditions for a cut are met, barring a significant weakening of the labor market?
So let me say, my own estimate is modestly restrictive, and there are a range of views of what the neutral rate is at this moment for our economy, and so others may say it's more restrictive or less restrictive even. We're going to be at some point, when we return to moving toward a more neutral stance, we'll be making that judgment as we go. I don't think we have a preset course. It's not so mechanical as saying, we've derived with great confidence the neutral rate and that is our destination, because really we understand that no one actually knows what the neutral rate is. We know it by its works, and that will be the way the economy reacts over time to, slightly looser policy.
Nick Timmeros, The Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, my question is about what have you learned over the last few months about the inflation generating and price pass-through process? And just to drill down, the June CPI report showed evidence of tariff-induced goods inflation. Now, the tariff landscape is only starting to be settled with some of these more recent deals. Given the lags between when tariffs are announced and when they show up in goods prices, is 2 months a long enough horizon to evaluate the impact and be confident that tariffs aren't impacting the broader inflation process?
I think you have to think of this as still quite early days. And so I think what we're seeing now is substantial amounts of tariff revenue being collected on the order of $30 billion a month, which is, substantially higher than before.
We probably need
And
close to 2 quarters
the evidence
worth.
seems to be mostly not paid only to a small extent through exporters lowering their price, and companies or retailers, sort of people who are upstream, institutions that are upstream from the consumer, are paying most of this for now. It's starting to show up in consumer prices, as you know, in the June report. We expect to see more of that. And we know from surveys that companies feel that they have every intention of putting this through to the consumer, but the truth is they may not be able to in many cases. So I think we're just going to have to watch and learn empirically how much of this and over what period of time. I think we've learned that the process will probably be slower than expected at the beginning, but we never expected it to be fast. We think we have a long way to go to really understand exactly how it will be. So that's how we're thinking of it right now.
So if I could follow up, is the reticence to look through core goods inflation being driven by the judgment that during the pandemic expectations proved more adaptive than anyone at the Fed expected? Is it being driven by uncertainty over how restrictive policy is?
You could argue we are a bit looking through goods inflation by not raising rates. You know, we haven't reacted to new inflation, but I mean, I wouldn't insist upon that. But I don't think, I think the base case, as I said, a reasonable base case is that these are one-time price effects. Of course, in the end, there will not be. This will not turn out to be inflation because we'll make sure that it's not. We will, through our tools, make sure that this does not move from being a one-time price increase to serious inflation. We want to do that efficiently, though, and that means we want to do it, if you move too soon, you wind up maybe not getting inflation all the way fixed, and you have to come back. That's inefficient. If you move too late, you might do unnecessary damage to the labor market. So there won't be, in the end, a big inflationary problem. What we're trying to do is accomplish that in a way that is efficient. But in the end, there should be no doubt that we will do what we need to do to keep inflation under control. Ideally, we do it efficiently.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. The one big bill, leaving aside the adjectives, do you expect it to add stimulus to the economy in 2026? And would that be an argument for remaining on hold or cutting back on the number of rate cuts you would expect for next year?
So, of course, let me just ritual disclaimer that we don't express any judgments or anything like that on fiscal legislation or other legislation for that matter. But I would say when you think that, you know, the biggest part of the bill was making permanent existing law on taxes, I don't think we see it as particularly stimulative. There should be some stimulative effect, but it shouldn't be significant over the next couple of years.
And to follow up, what do you, well, I don't want to put this in terms of you and the president, so let me ask it this way. Do you have concerns about the cost to the government of keeping rates elevated for longer in terms of interest rate charges?
Yeah, no, that's, you know, we have a mandate, and that's maximum employment and price stability. And it is, it's not something we do to consider the cost to the government of our rate changes. We have to be able to look at the goal variables Congress has given us, use the tools they've given us to achieve those goals, and that's what we do. We don't consider the fiscal needs of the federal government. No advanced economy central bank does that, and it wouldn't be good for, if we did do that, it would be good neither for our credibility nor for the credibility of U.S. fiscal policy. So it's just not something we take into consideration.
Victoria.
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. When it comes to the renovations of the Federal Reserve's headquarters that the administration has been looking into, do you see their interest in that issue as being directly tied to the president's push to get you to lower interest rates?
Not for me to say. I will say we had a nice visit with the president. It was an honor to host him. It's not something that happens very often at the Federal Reserve to have the president come over, let alone to visit a building. But it was a good visit.
Are there any aspects of the project that they've raised that you see as making you reconsider any aspects of the project?
So, you know, this project was hatched and conceived almost a decade ago now, and we went through the very long process of clearing it through historic preservation at the National Capital Planning Commission, and a lot of back and forth there. It was very constructive. We started out to do the work, and we're very well along on that work, and I was quite pleased to have the president say multiple times that what he really wanted to see was us getting this construction completed as soon as possible. That is our focus, and that's what we're going to do.
Andrew.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Andrew Ackerman with the Washington Post. What message do you take from the fact that inflation hit 2.1% last September and has bounced higher since? Why do you think financial conditions are restrictive and a neutral rate's below 4% when inflation has stopped falling for almost a year?
So inflation, when you talk about these 12-month inflation measures, you're always battling residual seasonality. So we'll have, for example, 2 months of high inflation sometimes early in the year, and then inflation turns lower, and a lot of that may just be an artifact. So that's why we look at the 12-month numbers. I think inflation is most of the way back to 2%. There are things like the catch-up inflation. So, for example, all the insurance costs that they're only now going through inflation, but they actually reflect inflationary pressures from 2-3 years ago. So that's got to go through. In addition, now we have 3 or 4 tenths of inflation in core inflation from tariffs. So, and we can't really separate that out. We're not going to have a separate kind of inflation that isn't the tariffs. We're always going to be dealing with all of inflation. But the composition, as I mentioned, has really changed. And if you go back to the last couple of years, it was all about services inflation, which was being very sticky. Now services inflation is coming down nicely. Goods inflation was well behaved before, and now goods inflation is going up. So the story has really changed. That's partially because of tariffs. It's also partially because we had restrictive policy in place, and we've seen that the result of that gradually work its way through the services economy.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask is, are you comfortable that BLS can continue performing their mission effectively if they take an 8% reduction in headcount and authorized spending as the administration has proposed?
I'm not going to comment on the administration's proposal. I do think, as I've said, I think that we're getting the data that we need to do our jobs, and I think it's really important that good data helps not just the Fed, it helps the government, but it also helps the private sector. People in the economy, they use this data a lot too, so it's quite important for our economy and certainly for the Fed's work and other government agencies' work that we continue to get better.
Set up an API.
Data. That's what we've been doing for 100 years.
Link
We've
up
been
to the
getting better
MLS.
and better and better. It's very hard to accurately capture in real time
Survey the
output
business
of a
owners, not
$20+
homeowners.
trillion economy. And the United States has been a leader in that for 100 years, and we really need to continue that, in my view.
Edward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence from Fox Business. How concerned are you with the data that we're coming in, showing no significant upward trend in inflation over the past 6 months, that the wait-and-see approach for inflation is actually giving companies cover to raise prices?
How concerned am I that say that again?
The wait-and-see approach is giving...
The wait-and-see approach, what do you mean by that?
For cutting rates. You're waiting to see if the tariffs will affect inflation. So it's a wait-and-see approach.
Well, so where policy's restrictive. When we start cutting, it'll go toward neutral.
Okay. This delay, though, where you're saying there's a one-time price increase for tariffs, which possibly could lead into bigger inflation or more inflation. Is that giving companies cover, though, to raise prices?
Well, what may be giving, it's not our policy stance, what may be giving some companies will certainly be taking advantage of the fact of the tariffs and all of the discussion of how they're going to, companies will raise prices when and as they can. And you saw it famously in the first administration of President Trump during those tariffs. Washing machines were tariffed, but dryers weren't. But what do you know? The price of dryers went up too, just like washing machines. So companies will often just they'll cross the street in a group, if you know what I mean. That'll happen. We don't see a lot of that. I mean, what we see now is basically the very beginnings of whatever the effects turn out to be on goods inflation. And I'll say again, they may be less than people estimate or more than people estimate. They're not going to be zero. Consumers will pay some of this. Businesses will pay some of this. Retailers will pay some of this. But we're just going to have to see it through.
And just to follow, if I could, some additional tariffs have been in place since February, and things really haven't broken yet with the economy. So how do you justify to somebody who's looking for a house, who's facing a 7% mortgage and maybe can't afford those rates? How do you justify
Housing mentioned.
Well, so the housing is a special case, right? We don't set mortgage rates at the Fed, right? We set an overnight rate, and the rates that go into mortgages are longer term rates, like Treasury rates. It might be 30-year rates, it might be shorter than that, but it's not the overnight Fed's rate. It's not that we don't have any effect. We do have an effect, but we're not the main effect. There are other things, though, going on in the housing sector, and one of those is just there's kind of a long-term housing shortage that we have. We haven't built enough housing. This is not something the Fed can help with, but then that'll be the case even after things normalize. So I think the best thing that we can do for housing is to have 2% inflation and maximum employment, and that's what we can contribute to housing. There are lots of other jobs to do for the private sector and Congress, but that's what we're trying to get to. I mean, we've made a lot of progress toward that. We have a very good labor market right now. Inflation, we were very close to 2%. We're seeing some goods inflation move us away, but so far not very far away.
One quick thing on that, they do have a lot of responsibility over the mortgage rates because the sentiment of our country, because of what they say about the employment rate and what they say about inflation, alters the bond market drastically to the point where investors actually price in future cuts. So he's not the main curator of mortgage rates is what he's saying, but they do have a bit of control over that market. And the bond market and them working with the Treasury to make sure that stays intact with any rate cuts that happen is also up to them. And that's why they invented quantitative easing, to supplement the market and press prices down on bonds because they weren't buying them up. Investors weren't buying them up. So the Fed created money to buy Treasury bonds to push rates down. So they do have that control.
Chris.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you. Well, can you give us a little more about what kind of economic data does the Fed need to see before you'll be ready to cut? I mean, do you need inflation back nearly to target? Are there other things in the pricing that you look for? Do you need to see weakening in the job market? What kind of things are you looking for?
I mean, ultimately, it could be any of those things, right? But you know, if you saw that the risks to the two goals were moving into balance, if they were fully in balance, that would imply that you should move toward a more neutral stance of policy. This is the special situation we're in, which is we have two-sided risk to both of our goals.
He's talking about stagflation.
When we paused, inflation was above target and the labor market was pretty good. So you know, that was a time when policy was restrictive when we paused. And to be restrictive is to be supporting a return to our inflation target, right? So as the two targets get back into balance, you would think you'd move in a way closer to neutral, and that the next steps that we take are likely to be in that direction. What will it take? You know, it'll be the totality of the evidence. As I mentioned, there's quite a lot of data coming in, which before the next meeting, will it be dispositive of that? You know, it's really hard to say. We don't make those decisions right now, so we'll have to see.
Well, I guess just in terms of inflation, though, for example, like some people would point to if it remains only in goods and it doesn't bleed over to services, then maybe that's evidence that the tariff effect is going to be a temporary one-time thing. Is that kind of thing affect your thinking, or do you just need to see the number come down closer to 2?
We'll look at everything. You know, it's, as I mentioned, you know, a pretty reasonable base case is that this will be a one-time price increase. And in the end, we'll make sure that that's the case. We're just trying to do that efficiently. And efficiently means getting the timing right so we don't, again, if we cut rates too soon, maybe we didn't finish the job with inflation. History is dotted with examples of that. If you cut too late, then maybe you're doing unnecessary damage to the labor market. So we're trying to get that timing right, and that's effectively what we're doing.
Claire.
Claire Jones, Financial Times. Just a question on the dollar. We've seen it decline quite heavily this year. I was wondering if there's been any discussion about that at the meetings and to what degree that may be complicating your attempts to get inflation back to target. Thank you.
So this goes back to the division of labor between the Fed and the Treasury, as you I'm sure know, and you know the Treasury only speaks to the dollar. It's not something that's been a topic of you know, major discussion at all at the Fed. I wouldn't say it doesn't come up. If the transcripts, when they come out in a few years, they'll probably reflect some mentions of the dollar, but it would never be a major focus.
And just to follow on, if I may, to Andrew's question, I think the amount of imputed data in CPI now is up to 35%. I mean, is there any discussion of that as well? Is there any consideration of looking at alternative measures, data scraping and so on, in order to just ensure you've got a good read on what's happening to prices in the US economy?
Good question.
You know, we're monitoring the situation. We do, of course, I mean, as you know, during the pandemic, we looked at a whole lot of new kinds of data. People are looking at big data sets that you can get from all sorts of places, and we do all of that. But at the same, we really need the government data. Really is the gold standard in data, and we need it to be, you know, to be good and be able to rely on it. And we're not going to be able to substitute for that. But you know, if we have to make do with what we have. But I certainly hope that we get what we need.
That gold standard set of data, by the way, from the government is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and is survey data. They call households, 40 to 50,000 households a month, to figure out what these numbers are going to be for unemployment, for shelter, and many other of the stats that we talk about. The gold standard of data in 2025 is surveys to households. That's what he said.
Jay O'Brien.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Jay O'Brien, ABC News. President Trump has obviously invoked your name a lot. He has personally pressured you. Are you concerned the way that conduct might impact the Fed's independence going forward?
I'll just say that, I think that having an independent central bank has been an institutional arrangement that has served the public well. And as long as it serves the public well, it should continue and be respected. If it didn't serve the public well, then it wouldn't be something that we should just automatically defend. But what it gives us and other central banks, what it gives you is the ability to make these very challenging decisions that in ways that are focused on the data and the evolving outlook, the balance of risks and all the things we talk about, and not political factors. And so governments all over the advanced economy world have chosen to put a little bit of distance between direct political control of those decisions and the decision makers. So if you were not to have that, there would be a great temptation, of course, to use interest rates to affect elections, for example. And that's something that we don't want to do. So I think that's pretty widely understood. Certainly it is in Congress. And I think it's very important. I'll just say that.
Maria Eloisa.
Afternoon, Sir Powell. Maria Luisa Capurro from Bloomberg News. You mentioned a slowdown in consumer spending, and I wanted to see if you could walk us through what was the discussion with the committee around that. We've seen delinquency rates rising for upper-income households. How do you see that evolving in the next few months, and how much of a vulnerability that is for the economy going forward?
Consumer spending had been very, very strong for the last couple of years, and had repeatedly, forecasters, not just us, had been forecasting it would slow down, and now maybe it finally has. So I would say, if you talk to credit card companies, for example, they will tell you that the consumer's in solid shape and that spending is at a healthy level. It's not growing rapidly, but it's at a healthy level. And delinquencies are not a problem. You mentioned high-end delinquencies. I don't know what to make of that. I read the same thing. But so generally, if you look at the banks, and when the banks talk about in their earnings calls, the performance of credit has been good. So essentially, you have a consumer that's in good shape and is spending, not at a rapid rate, but it's true. And it was, again, right in line with what we expected. The GDP data that we got this week. And I think it's still a little bit difficult to interpret because you have these massive swings in net exports, which may also be affecting, some of that can affect consumer spending as well. Look, it's one of the data points that we pay most careful attention to, and there's no question that it's slowed. And we're watching it closely, but we also watch the labor market and the performance of inflation. Those are our two variables that we're assigned to maximize.
And just to follow up on what my colleagues were asking about this dissent, Governor Waller said that the labor market is on edge, and he was pointing to weaknesses on the private sector. I was wondering, you've said that the main number to look at is the unemployment number overall, but what was the discussion about the state of the private jobs market?
So I'm not going to talk about any individual's, any individual's comments. I wouldn't do that. But look, I think what we know is that private sector job creation, certainly in the last report we'll see on Friday, but had come down a bit. And if you take the QCEW adjustment seriously, it may be even lower, maybe close to zero. But the unemployment rate was still low. So what that's telling you is that demand for workers is slowing, but so is the supply. So it's in balance, oddly enough. You've got a very low unemployment rate, and it's kind of been there for a year as job creation has moved down. But also we know that, because of immigration policy, really, the flow into our labor forces is just a great deal slower. And those two things have slowed more or less in tandem. If you look at things like I mentioned, quits, look at wages. Wages are gradually cooling.
Gradually.
Vacancies to unemployment. Those things have been pretty stable they haven't really moved a lot in a full year. So I think if you take the totality of the labor market data, you've got a solid labor market. But I think you have to see that there are downside risks. You don't see weakening in the labor market, but I think you've got downside risks in a world where unemployment's being held down because both demand and supply are declining. I think it's worth paying close attention to it, and we are.
Nancy.
Bro wants to go home.
Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. One more question on the lack of unanimity in today's decision, the two dissents. Was there talk during the meeting? I know you're not going to talk about exactly what individuals said, but in general, was there talk during the meeting of cutting rates, and what was the case against that at the meeting?
Sure. So, we have an economic go-around where people talk about the economy, and then that's yesterday, and then today we have a monetary policy go-around. All the way around the table, everyone gives their views. So the discussion around policy was, the majority view was still what it has been, which is that inflation's running above target, maximum employment is right at target. That means policy should be a little bit restrictive, somewhat restrictive, because we want inflation to move all the way back to its target. So that's where people have been and still are. Two of our members felt that the time had come to cut, and that they, for the reasons that they're going to express. I won't tell you the reasons. They'll issue some kind of a thing in the next day or so. So, but
just tell us what they said.
That's the story, and I would say, well argued, very thoughtfully argued all around the table, good arguments, and it's a situation where, unusual situation. The economy is in good shape, but it's an unusual situation where you have risks to both your employment mandate and your inflation mandate. That's the nature of a supply shock.
Jerome is so good at making people feel like their question's being answered, and he just doesn't
answer perspectives on that, as well as different views of where the neutral rate is, so that different views of how tight policy is. So we have those. I will say what you hope is that people, explain their positions very thoughtfully and clearly, and we absolutely had that today, all the way around the table. I would call it one of the better meetings I can recall from that standpoint.
And you've said you're waiting to be confident inflation is heading toward your 2% target before you start cutting rates. When you do get that confidence, would you be in favor of lowering rates right away?
It's not quite the way I would put it. I said that's why we think policy should be restrictive, is because inflation is above target. When we have risks to both goals, one of them is farther away from goal than the other, and that's inflation. Maximum employment's at goal. So that means policy should be tight, because tight policy is what brings inflation down. If you came to the view that the risks to the two were more in balance, that would imply that policy shouldn't be restrictive. It should be more neutral, a neutral stance, and that would be somewhat lower than where we are now. No one knows exactly where that is. So that's the framework I think I'd be taking. And, we'll just have to see. We're going to be obviously looking at a lot of data in the next cycle. It is one of the cycles where we have 2 employment and 2 inflation reports, and we'll see where that takes us.
Demon Slayer, that's definitely Corpo Shill. That's definitely where he got that skill set. He's so good at just not answering, but making you feel
Jeff
like
Cox
you
from
got it.
CNBC.com. A metric that you like to cite a lot is the final sales to private domestic purchasers. That was down to a 1.2% gain in second quarter from 1.9% in Q1, suggesting that there's some softening in underlying demand. I just wondering if you look at that, you combine that with some of the housing numbers, the weakness that you acknowledged at the top of your remarks that the housing market is in fact weak, and the inflation numbers from GDP today came down to 2.1% for headline, 2.5% for core. I'm wondering how much more movement you would need to see from these data points before you would be comfortable with cutting in, say, September.
It's going to be the total. Hard to answer that specifically. PDFP, I think, for the first half.
Here comes the
product
same
domestic
answer.
Final purchases, or final sales, as people call it, was 1.6 on the first half. GDP, I believe, was 1.2%. That's the whole half. You mentioned the quarters. So those are slower, but GDP is bumpy quarter to quarter, half to half, and often gets revised, after the fact. The labor market data we still think is, continue to think is the best data we have on the economy, and that shows a 4.1% unemployment rate. It shows wages, still at a healthy level, but moving ever closer to what we would regard as long-run sustainable, consistent with longer-run productivity and 2% inflation. So the labor market is actually still quite solid.
Wage market is so far behind
Inflation
productivity.
is
What are you
above
sourcing
target,
there?
even ignoring tariffs, it's a little bit above target, and tariffs. So we're watching all of that, and again, trying to do the right thing in what is a challenging situation because you're being pulled in 2 directions, and you have to decide which of those it took to go in. And actually, at some point, if they're sort of equally at risk, then you really want to be at a neutral policy stance, which we're not right now.
So it would be safe to say that if the data kind of stays in line with where it is right now, that you wouldn't be comfortable with cutting in September?
I'm not going to say that. No,
I'm not going to answer your question.
I just think we're going to need to see the data.
I'm tired of
And,
saying the
it can
same
go
thing
in many
over and
different
over again.
directions. The inflation data and the employment data, and we're going to make a judgment based on all of the data and based on that balance of risks analysis that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Greg, Rob, for the last question.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from MarketWatch. The Treasury Secretary has said recently that it would be confusing for the markets if you stayed on as a governor after your term as chair ends. And I was wondering if you had any update for us on a decision on that front.
Treasury Secretary
I do
Scott
not have
Bessent.
any update for you. Thanks very much, everyone.
He'll let you know if I have any update for you. He said, I'm not even answering that. Scott Bessent said that. All right, let's break down what we just heard. Federal Reserve event has ended. I have 5 big notes I took from this. Comment what your takeaway was. I loved seeing him answer the same question about 19 different questions with the same answer. A couple different answers he had in his tool belt that he kept whipping out. I heard lower inflation on services. But when we looked at the CPI index earlier, we saw that the services industry, especially in electric services and utilities, as well as the service they count as shelter, owner equivalent rent, and rent, are actually up. So I don't know where he's getting from that. Overall effects from tariffs yet to be seen. He is being very clear that they need another quarter, maybe 2 quarters of data before they're going to be comfortable making movements. A lot of that based off tariff uncertainty. He was asked about did all of the FOMC, did all of his board of governors, bank leaders agree with the take to keep rates where they're at? We got word that 2 of them, no. We knew this from the Beige report already, that 2 board members not on board with a continued non-stimulating market stance, keeping rates high or restrictive is the most common word used. 2 aren't in agreement, and those 2 did call for quarter-point cuts in this meeting. It'll be interesting to see what their take is in September. Couple questions he was asked. He was asked, do we see downside risk in the job market? He said, we do. He said it's very clear, not being seen in the U3. Very clear it's not being seen in the U3, but there is downside risk right now. We were seeing in a couple questions brought up talks of delinquencies, late payments, cars, credit cards, homes. They have started to tick up. So the question about the bifurcated economy, speaking to two different types of markets, the wealthy and the not wealthy, two different economies, essentially. We do not know if they will be able to raise prices. This was a quote, actually, that I wanted to step in on real quick, but I actually held back. Go figure. I didn't yap. It's very interesting. He's talking about companies maybe not having the ability to up their prices, but we're talking about a type of inflation called cost push inflation in this scenario, when the cost of bringing the product or service to market goes up in cost. More specifically, in this case, the cost of import, the cost of acquisition of the item before the merchandiser can actually put it on market for the consumer to buy. Cost push inflation will always raise prices. The only guarantee we have is that cost push will always raise prices. The one thing we don't know is if the cost goes down, will the price go down? You can ask any home builder right now. Wood went down, steel went down over the course of 2022 to 2023. The spike from 2022 and the logistics problems faded. Prices went up when cost push went up, but when cost push went away, guess what happened? Demand fit the market right where it wanted to be, right where they wanted it to be, continuing to sell homes at a high cost. Interesting, he said he didn't think some corporations would be able to raise their price due to cost push. He was asked a very blunt question. Do you have concern in the cost of the government's debt? Are you concerned? Donald Trump has been made very clear. J.D. Vance has made very clear. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, made very clear. I believe Mike Johnson's touched on it. House Speaker. We need rates lower so that we can refinance our Treasury debt, our debt to other investors we have to pay on that's coming due. We have a maturity wall for a lot of our debt. He said he's not concerned. He is not concerned. We heard it from the horse's mouth. He is not concerned. We reacted to a Trump clip just last week on our last show, show number 13. Show number 13, Trump said very clearly, I enjoyed my meeting at the Fed. I enjoyed walking around with Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell told me everything's going very well. The economy's doing very well. Congratulations. And Donald Trump said, I took him saying that. I took him saying that the economy's doing well, the country's doing well, as to say, we are going to lower rates. We went in depth for about an hour together to show how that is a speaking out of two mouths statement. You can't say everything is going well and that rates should lower. Jerome said this about 12 times in this meeting. And the last point that I got was that where there was no answer. They were asked, or Jerome was asked, what do you need to see to suggest a cut? What do you need to see in the supply, demand, CPI, housing? Pick whatever you want. You want to look at private, foreign, and domestic trade? You want to look at GDP? Do you want to look at inflation? You want just what's one number that you need to see to suggest you'll be comfortable with a rate cut in September? And he gave no answer. There was a lot of talking, a lot of word salading, no real answer. It's a combination of effects. They'll address it when there's there, and their main focus remains on their two main mandates: to keep prices low for the everyday consumer in America, keep prices stable, and keep unemployment at bay. Keep employment at maximum employment. They say at below 5% U3, they're achieving this mandate, and they want to get inflation below 2% before they start considering, even though it didn't answer directly, it seems like they want to get inflation back down trending, if not below the 2% year-over-year mark, before they consider rate cuts. If you're going to get my prediction for what September is to bring, we will have more job market updates. We will have more job opening updates. We'll have another GDP update. Well, actually, no, we just got that GDP update. But we'll also have another big CPI release. My guess is we don't see a cut in September. And that's big because I believe it's a 90+% likelihood. I think it's 92% is the current number for likelihood of a cut in September. I think that's going to start dropping. I think we're going to start dropping to maybe closer to a 50-50. This meeting does not give me any confidence that within the next 45 days that we're going to see data that supports cutting rates. We are very far from that in the perspective of the FOMC and the Federal Reserve, without regards for two of the members saying they wanted a quarter cut. But that's our meeting. Jerome is standing firm. If you've listened to a lot of these meetings, I've listened to pretty much each one, and I have been listening to each one for the last 5 years. There's very common phrases, very common answers, very common leading away from a direct answer because we don't really 100% know. And the other mention, and this is where I'll end off with, is he did tackle or touch on the threat of stagflation, the number one enemy of the Federal Reserve. Why? Because stagflation puts their mandates in battle against each other. I have to keep prices low, and I have to keep unemployment low. If you have to do both, and both start going up, unemployment starts going up while inflation's going up. If that were to happen, this is the situation where the dual mandate is at risk. And he brought it up twice. One time it was from a question. One time he brought it up himself about this idea of both going up sequentially. And they don't really have an answer for it. They've multiple times been asked about it. They don't really have an answer for it. If stagflation like the late 70s were to come back about, what would they do? And they said they'll see how far they are from each of their goals and they'll make an assessment and decision then. But again, I don't see a rate cut in the future. I also don't see that rate cut drastically affecting the 10, 20, and 30-year Treasury bonds. It so drastically would need to come down in order to promote lower mortgage rates, car rates, credit card rates. But we're here. We're listening. We're staying tuned with what's going on in the economy at all times for the normal everyday person on this channel, and we're keeping it as politically unaffiliated as possible, but we'll call out realities when we see realities in front of us. Epstein. Appreciate you as always. We'll be going live every single month for the Federal Reserve meetings and any other deeply important economic live streams. Something comes up, he's talking about housing, we're going to be on there. So appreciate you much. Subscribe for the show and catch episode number 14 dropping this Friday with the most famous real estate agent on the planet. She's great. That's your only hint.